What's going on YouTube? This is Crazy Samurai 71 here, bringing you guys another video. Today I'm bringing you guys a video on Kamen Rider Gyo episode 2. This episode is called Best Match 2017, and the episode overall was pretty good. There were some really good things about it. We got to see Build and Cross C again, which was great, and we got to see Gyo use his first ride armor, which is cool, and a couple other things were showcased that were a first. So we'll get into those this episode, and also some things that lead into things that will be important later down the line and will be more reoccurring. So all that and more is very good, and let's get started. So the episode begins with us seeing that, as we saw in the previous episode, another build was defeated by Gyo. At least we think so. What actually ends up happening is that Wool manages to bring him back. Even though he was defeated, he isn't defeated. That's something that's kind of worth noting. Wool was able to restore the other build, Ride Watch, and bring back another build. And so at that point they realize that they're going to have to fight him again. In the meantime, we also end up seeing is that Gaze in the previous episode used the ghost armor to transform and then start his attack on Sogo. What happens is that when he ends up starting his attack, Sogo isn't doing so well. And what happens is that eventually Tsukiyomi ends up going into the time machine to protect Sogo from, from Gaze. We end up seeing this happen, and then at that point he ends up looking at the ride watches that he has on him. The one that he sees right away is this ride watch that he hasn't used yet, which is his bike ride watch. He ends up taking it out, throwing it, and then it turns into a bike, so he begins to retreat away. At that point, Gaze also takes out his bike and begins to try to go after him. Gaze manages to knock him off to the side at one point, but what happens is that Sogo ends up continuing down the path and eventually manages to do a quick maneuver where he jumps over a barrier and then hides so that he isn't seen by Gaze, and then Gaze just keeps riding because he thinks that he must have gone way further ahead, but Gaze has no idea where he is. Then following this, what ends up happening is that Tsukiyomi arrives on the scene, and suddenly Gaze and Tsukiyomi ends up talking to each other. So at this point they end up discussing things. Gaze is kind of uncertain as to why Tsukiyomi is protecting Gyo when he knows that when she knows that Gyo is this evil overlord, and why would you protect someone that's going to become that way? At the same time, Tsukiyomi has this desire to protect him, which she's not even clear herself as to why she's doing it. But there's something in her that's making her feel that she can trust him, I guess you could say. At least that's what I'm speculating here. They don't say that, but that's what you would imagine. So what does end up happening is that eventually they're confronted by another build. And this time, Gaze ends up having to fight it. He transforms into Kamen Rider Gaze and tries to do an attack against it. And then eventually Sogo is met by Woes. Woes ends up talking to him about, how he's taken the leap to becoming this overlord by becoming Kamen Rider Gyo, and the idea of how there are these time jackers that are traveling from different time periods that are trying to affect the history, and at the same time Tsukiyomi and Gaze are also trying to stop him, and so everyone's trying to change the history, and Sogo is just like, what am I doing? Like, what's going on here? And he also ends up learning from Woes that apparently another build is still around and Gaze is fighting him right now. So at that point what happens is that at the same time Sogo ends up deciding to go back and fight alongside Gaze and the others, and Tsukiyomi, and what happens is that he ends up protecting them from an attack that would have taken them out. And in this case, he managed to protect them, which is a surprise to them, the fact that Gyo is protecting them because of how Gyo acts. This doesn't show the same way that Gyo would be. Gyo wouldn't care, would probably let them die. So it's very different. At the same time, what we do end up seeing is that he ends up trying to use a finishing move, which doesn't work out. The finishing move, it takes out the other build, but then another build is brought back, and this time he just continues to fight, and Gaze tries to fight some more, and what happens is that Sogo thinks maybe the real build would be able to defeat this build. So he ends up going to the cafe where he met build in the past, and what happens is that he ends up finding him, and he's not acting like himself. He's acting like this fan club guy that's into partying and, has a very different mindset. And when Sogo talks about being Kamen Rider Build and to Ryoga about being Cross Z, they have no idea what he's talking about. And then what happens is that suddenly his presence leads to these ride watches that are apparently in their pockets activating. They pull them out, and when these ride watches activate, what happens is that their memories are restored. They begin to remember what actually had happened, and they know who Sogo is. And at that point, what happens is that as they're explaining things, Sento has this vision from the past of Sogo using the ride watch that he has in his hand and being able to transform into the Kamen Rider Geo build armor. And at this point, what happens is that he gives up his ride watch, and so does Ryoga give up his ride watch, and basically what happens is that Sento says, "Send my regards to my past self." The reason why that's worth noting is because then Sogo realizes what he has to do. So he ends up going to Gaze and Tsukuyomi, basically explaining that they have to travel to the time of when Build was around in order to defeat another Build. So they end up traveling to the year 2017 with their time machines, and then what happens is that when they reach that time period, we end up seeing that Ryoga and Sento are there. They're confused as to what this another build is when they see him, and initially the another build actually uses, in their first battle, a baseball bottle, but in this case he actually gets two new bottles. One's a swimmer and one's an archer bottle that he makes from a swimmer and an archer, and he uses them in combat. Like, he creates a pool of water, and he also shoots arrows like an archer would from the air. So that's pretty cool. What we do end up seeing is that Ryoga and Sento try to fight. They actually transform and everything, but their transformation, it doesn't last long. They're not in the best state right now, so they can't really hold up in combat. So what does end up happening eventually is that Gaze and Sogo end up appearing, and they end up transforming this time, and they actually join the combat alongside Ryoga and Sento. The four of them fight, but very shortly after, Ryoga and Sento can't fight anymore, and they know. What happens is that Gaze ends up using the ghost. Sorry for that noise. It was a truck. Ends up using the ghost armor. Now the thing is that prior to this, Wool ends up appearing, and this is the first time we've actually seen Wool confronting Gaze and also Sogo, even though, for all we know, Wool may already have known about Gaze. We don't know if he knows about Sogo necessarily, but basically Wool explains how another build came to exist and what happened to the person that was inside another build, and what would have happened had another build not existed, and all those details. So it's pretty interesting to note all that. Following this, what does end up occurring, as I said before, Gaze ends up using the ghost armor, and he begins to fight, and this basically leads to Sogo recognizing, wait, I have a ride watch right now. So he ends up using Build's ride watch with the Geo ride watch to take on the form of Kamen Rider Geo build armor, and he ends up using that. And then what happens is that Woes appears and introduces the fact that this is his first time using another rider's powers, and that he's taking his step even closer to becoming the overlord that they know of in the future. At the same time, we do end up seeing that Sento and Sogo end up talking to each other, and then they end up doing and then Sento does his pose, and Sugo tries to copy Sento's pose, but it doesn't work very well. And then what happens is that they continue their assault. We end up seeing that Sugo ends up using the vortex break finish, which is kind of cool. It's kind of like this finish that's similar to the one that Build used to use, but like it adds to it and is kind of themed after him, while also adds new things to it as well. And he manages to do a finish that defeats another build. At the same time, there is a point where Sugo ends up giving Gaze the Cross Z ride watch, and he actually puts it in his Zax weapon, which allows him to shoot an arrow that that's powered by Cross Z's energy, and they manage to, with their combined power, defeat another build, and then another build turns back into the normal human that he was, and at this point things are fixed. At the same time, what does end up occurring is that history changes after that point, where he ends up thinking that he's Takumi Katsuragi instead of Sento, because the events haven't happened yet. And at the same time, Ryuga doesn't really know who Cross Z is, and Katsuragi doesn't know who Build is necessarily. So there are those changes happening, and they don't really know what the ride watches are. But the whole idea is that Sugo believes that in the future both of them will become the riders that they're supposed to be, and so he trusts them with these ride watches, and so future just exists, and now he can use the ride watches when he feels like it. Again, unfortunately, we do not see the Cross Z ride armor used this time, but it would be cool to have seen it, but you never know. I would love to see some secondary rider forms being used in episodes. I don't know if it will happen, but it is good to see that at least we got to see the ride watch, even if it was brief. Additionally, what does end up happening is that they return back to the year 2018, and they end up discussing things, and then we end up seeing that Tsukuyomi and Gaze end up discussing things about how like they still were surprised about Geo protecting them back when another build was trying to attack them in the future, when year 2018, and how they're not sure if it really was Oma Geo and if they're really the same person, Geo and Oma Geo. So then at this point they realize that they have to keep a closer eye on him, and they decide to take up the rent space that's inside of Sugo's uncle's workshop that's still available, and so that way they're going to be living together. So basically Tsukuyomi, Gaze, and Sugo are going to be living together, and at the same time Gaze is still really wanting to completely defeat Sugo. Now again, we'll see what happens, and I'm sure just in general, as we're seeing from this episode, that clearly they're going to get along, but there's going to be some tension at first between Sugo and Gaze. Initially there'll be a lot of tension, but what will probably happen is, and this is something I'm expecting, it will start off that way, but then it will eventually turn from being tension to being trust and understanding. And when Oma Geo reveals his identity, or when things start pointing to a clear idea as to who he'll become, that will lead to things changing. Again, that's what I'm expecting. I'm expecting things to, over time, develop and turn into trust. But it is interesting to note that he's not starting off as being completely against him. They aren't enemies or anything like that. There's just this distrust that's happening because of the future and what's happened there. So it'll be interesting to see what happens. What we do end up seeing as well is that Woz ends up discussing the whole idea of how he's taking one step further to becoming this overlord by gaining the legendary rider's power, and he's already going to be encountering another legendary rider in the next episode, which will be Emu, or M from Kamen Rider X-Aid. So X-Aid will be in there, and also Brave is supposed to show up. So both of them will be showing up in the next episode. It is good to see that they actually are doing the main primary, and I guess you could say the main secondary, which is kind of nice. I don't know if that's going to be consistent throughout. If it is, that's great. Again, I don't know if that's going to happen every single time. It would be great if it were that way. Again, when you think back to Decade, they didn't really do that as much. with having both primary and secondary riders. They had pretty much primary for the most part, if not always. So if they can get both, that's awesome. I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. And it should be good. Next episode, I'm definitely looking forward to that. Also, we'll be introduced to the Time Jacker Aura, which will be cool to see her introduction being made. And I'm definitely looking forward to seeing that. We do see another X8 in the little teaser for the next episode. We do not see another X8. We do not see. We see another X8, but we do not see the X8 armor. I don't think so. It will be interesting to see where things will go. And otherwise, that's about it for me, guys. So please remember to like, comment, subscribe, and I'll see you guys in the next video. So until then, guys, I'm Crazy Samurai 71, and goodbye, guys.